On December 15th, 1967, traffic was moving slowly across the Silver Bridge. Christmas was only 10 days away, and the bridge was crowded with people heading home from work, carrying shopping bags and making plans for the weekend. Children sat in the back seats of cars while drivers waited impatiently for traffic to clear. Then, a sharp, metallic sound cut through the evening. The bridge shifted. Steel began to twist. Before anyone understood what was happening, the roadway dropped into the freezing Ohio River. Cars vanished beneath the water. Families standing on the riverbank watched helplessly as rescue teams searched through twisted metal and darkness. 46 people died. Engineers would later trace the collapse to a tiny crack hidden inside one of the bridge's steel components. It was a physical failure, measurable and explainable. But for many people in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, that explanation did not settle everything. Because for more than a year before the bridge fell, residents had been reporting something they could not explain. A dark figure near the roads, massive wings, 2 glowing red eyes. Some said it chased their cars, others claimed it watched from fields, rooftops, and trees. Then, shortly before the disaster, the sightings ended. After the bridge collapsed, the creature seemed to disappear completely. That timing created a question that has followed Point Pleasant ever since. Was the Mothman simply a strange animal transformed into a legend by fear? Or had it appeared because something terrible was coming? To understand why that question still matters, we have to go back to the night when 4 young people drove into an abandoned military site and saw something they would never forget. In 1966, Point Pleasant was a small river town where unusual stories rarely stayed secret for long. The population was modest, neighbors knew one another, local restaurants filled with familiar faces every morning, and most days passed without anything dramatic enough to make national news. Just outside town, however, stood a place that felt separate from ordinary life. Locals called it the TNT area. During World War II, the government had used this site to manufacture and store explosives. Hundreds of concrete bunkers had been built across the land, connected by narrow roads winding through forests and wetlands. When the war ended, the site was abandoned. Trees grew over the roads, vines covered cracked concrete, old structures disappeared behind brush and rust. During the day, hunters and curious teenagers sometimes passed through the area. At night, few people stayed for long. The isolation made every sound feel closer. Headlights revealed only narrow pieces of road before the darkness closed again. The old bunkers stood silently among the trees, hidden until a car passed directly in front of them. On November 15, 1966, Roger and Linda Scarberry were driving through the area with Steve and Mary Millette. They were not searching for anything unusual. They were simply spending the evening together. As the car passed one of the abandoned buildings, Roger noticed something near the end of the road. At first, it looked like a person standing in the shadows. He slowed down. The headlights moved across the figure. Then everyone in the car saw it. It appeared taller than the average man, with a broad body and wings folded behind it. Its shape was dark enough to blend into the surroundings, but the eyes were impossible to miss. They were large, round, and red. The witnesses did not describe them as ordinary reflections. They said the eyes seemed to shine all on their own. For several seconds, the figure remained still. It stared toward the car. No one inside knew what to say. Then, it moved. Roger accelerated. The tires scattered gravel as the car raced away from the building. When the passengers looked back, the figure was following them. It opened its wings, rose from the ground, and began gliding behind the vehicle. Roger drove faster. The speedometer passed 50 miles per hour, then 60, then 70. The creature did not fall behind. According to the group, it stayed with them as the car approached nearly 100 miles per hour. There was no visible struggle in its movement. It did not appear to beat its wings wildly. It simply remained in the air, following them through the darkness. The red eye stayed visible through the rear window. Only when the car reached the edge of Point Pleasant did the figure finally turn away and disappear. The 4 witnesses did not go home. They drove directly to the Mason County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff George Johnson listened as they described what had happened. They were not laughing. They were not presenting the story as some joke. Some were still visibly shaken. Johnson could not confirm what they had seen, but he believed that they were genuinely frightened by something. The story reached the local newspaper soon afterward. A reporter needed a name for the creature. Inspired by the popularity of Batman on television, the paper called it the Mothman. Under normal circumstances, the story might have lasted a few days. People would have laughed about it, argued over what the witnesses had really seen, and eventually moved on. But other reports followed. A firefighter claimed he saw a giant bird with glowing eyes flying over a nearby field. A contractor reported watching a large winged figure rise from the ground. Drivers said something followed their cars along isolated roads before disappearing into the trees. Some witnesses spoke immediately. Others waited because they feared being ridiculed. The descriptions were not identical, but the same details returned again and again. A tall, dark figure, large wings, red eyes, and a disturbing sense that the creature was not merely passing through the area. It was watching. That feeling became almost as important as the sightings themselves. People began avoiding the TNT area after sunset. Drivers looked more carefully at shapes near the roadside. Parents called their children home earlier. The town had not yet accepted the idea that a monster was living nearby, but something had changed. The sightings continued. Then the mystery spread beyond the creature. Residents began reporting unusual lights moving above the trees near the abandoned military site. Some hovered without making any sound. Others changed direction suddenly before disappearing. Soon afterward, stories circulated about strangers dressed in dark suits, visiting witnesses, and asking detailed questions. What exactly had they seen? How long had it remained visible? Had they spoken to anyone else? Some witnesses described the visitors as calm, but unsettling. Others believed those stories had been exaggerated as fear spread through the town. No one could prove the strange men were connected to the Mothman. No one could prove the lights were connected either. But each new report made Point Pleasant feel less ordinary. Reporters arrived. Researchers interviewed witnesses. Photographers waited near the TNT area hoping to capture evidence. Most found nothing. That did not weaken the story. It made the mystery more frustrating. If so many people had seen something, why was there no clear photograph? If the creature was only a large bird, why did the reports continue for months? And if the witnesses were imagining it, why were so many of them describing the same red eyes and enormous wings? The most practical explanation involved a bird. Some experts suggested the sandhill crane, which can stand several feet tall and has a wingspan large enough to look frightening at night. Red markings near its eyes might appear in the glow of headlights. The theory explained part of the story. It did not explain everything. Sandhill cranes were not commonly seen around Point Pleasant at the time. More importantly, the witnesses did not describe an animal struggling to escape from a vehicle. They described something that followed them. Something that appeared to keep pace. Something that seemed aware of their fear. Others argued that the newspaper coverage had created mass hysteria. Once people expected to see the Mothman, every shadow became suspicious. An owl became a monster. A bird crossing the road became a winged figure. Fear shaped what people believed they were seeing. That explanation was possible, but several witnesses claimed they had encountered the figure before hearing the most famous stories. Some avoided the press entirely. Others waited days before coming forward. The more people tried to solve the mystery, the more questions appeared. Then another interpretation began to take hold. Perhaps the Mothman was not hiding near Point Pleasant because it wanted to attack anyone. Perhaps it was there because something else was approaching. Across different cultures, stories exist of strange beings appearing before death, disaster, or major change. The idea sounded impossible. Yet as the sightings continued into 1967, some residents began to wonder whether the creature was less like a predator and more like a warning. At the time, no one knew what that warning could mean. The Silver Bridge still carried thousands of people safely across the Ohio River. Christmas shopping continued. Families went to work and school. Life moved forward. But hidden inside the bridge, a crack was slowly growing. And while no one in Point Pleasant could see it, the structure connecting their town to Ohio was moving closer to failure. The months that followed felt strangely inconsistent. Some weeks passed without a single report. Then, almost overnight, several witnesses would come forward describing encounters that sounded remarkably familiar. A delivery driver claimed he saw a towering figure standing beside a deserted stretch of highway just before dawn. A family driving home late one evening reported two bright red eyes watching them from the tree line before a dark shape lifted silently into the air. Hunters moving through the woods spoke of hearing powerful wings overhead without ever seeing what made the sound. Each story added another layer to the mystery. Yet none of them answered the question everyone wanted answered. What was it? Researchers arrived with notebooks full of theories. Wildlife experts searched for evidence of large birds. Journalists interviewed witnesses one after another, comparing details and looking for inconsistencies. The more they investigated, the stranger the case became. The witnesses came from different backgrounds, different ages, different professions. Many had never met. Yet they continued describing a remarkably similar figure. Not every detail matched perfectly, but the central image remained almost unchanged. A dark shape, massive wings, glowing red eyes, and an overwhelming feeling that the creature wasn't simply crossing their path. It was observing them. Some psychologists suggested the answer wasn't in the woods at all. They believed the town had experienced the perfect storm of expectation and suggestion. Once the first newspaper story spread, people naturally became more alert. Normal sounds felt unusual. Ordinary shadows became suspicious. The human mind has always searched for patterns, especially during uncertain times. Perhaps Point Pleasant was doing exactly that. Others disagreed. They pointed out that several witnesses reported encounters before the story became front-page news. Some refused interviews because they feared becoming the subject of ridicule. If people only wanted attention, many asked, why avoid it? Then came the explanation that refused to disappear. What if the Mothman wasn't an animal? What if it wasn't even a physical creature? Throughout history, many cultures have described mysterious figures appearing before moments of great tragedy. The Irish spoke of the banshee. Ancient Romans recorded strange signs in the sky before disasters. Across different traditions, stories emerged of silent messengers whose appearances were tied not to causing catastrophe, but to witnessing it. Supporters of the Mothman legend began asking a disturbing question. What if Point Pleasant was experiencing one of those stories in real life? The idea sounded impossible, but as the months passed, something even stranger happened. The sightings began to fade, not gradually, abruptly. Phone calls to local newspapers slowed. Police received fewer reports. The conversations that had dominated diners and barbershops for months quietly disappeared. People noticed. Some took it as proof the excitement had finally passed. Others found the silence more unsettling than the sightings themselves. It felt unfinished, as though everyone had been waiting for something they couldn't name. Life slowly returned to normal. Children talked about Christmas vacation. Storefronts filled with decorations, holiday music drifted through downtown. The strange events of the previous year began feeling like a story that would soon be forgotten. No one knew that only days remained. December 15th, 1967, arrived cold and overcast. Rush hour traffic moved steadily across the Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, with Gallipolis, Ohio. Drivers had crossed it thousands of times before. Parents hurried home. Workers finished another ordinary day. Teenagers made plans for the weekend. There was nothing about that evening to suggest history was about to change. Then, witnesses heard a loud, metallic snap. At first, many assumed it was a minor mechanical problem. Within seconds, they realized something far worse was happening. The bridge lurched violently. Steel supports twisted under impossible pressure. Cars began sliding towards a section of roadway that was no longer there. In less than a minute, the entire structure collapsed into the icy Ohio River. Vehicles disappeared beneath the water almost instantly. Rescue crews raced to the scene. Divers searched through freezing currents and tangled steel long into the night. When the recovery ended, 46 people had lost their lives. The disaster shocked the entire country. Investigators launched one of the most detailed engineering studies of its time. Months later, they reached a conclusion. The bridge had failed because of a tiny crack inside a single steel eyebar. The flaw was incredibly small, almost impossible to detect during routine inspections. Years of stress had slowly weakened the structure until one ordinary Friday evening became the moment everything gave away. For engineers, the mystery had an answer. For Point Pleasant, another mystery was only beginning, because almost immediately after the collapse, the Mothman disappeared. There were no more major sightings, no more reports of glowing red eyes near lonely roads, no more stories of giant wings crossing the night sky. It was as though the figure that had haunted the town for 13 months had completed whatever purpose had brought it there. To skeptics, the timing meant nothing. The bridge collapse became the only story that mattered. People were grieving. News organizations shifted their attention toward the tragedy. The legend naturally faded into the background. But for believers, the silence spoke louder than the sightings ever had. They never believed the Mothman caused the disaster. Instead, they believed it witnessed it, or perhaps tried to warn people about something no human being could yet see. That single possibility transformed a local mystery into an international legend. Today, nearly 6 decades later, Point Pleasant embraces the story that once terrified it. Visitors from around the world travel to the town every year. A towering stainless steel statue of the Mothman stands in the center of downtown, drawing thousands of photographs from curious tourists. The Mothman Museum preserves newspaper clippings, witness interviews, historical artifacts, and records from one of America's most unusual mysteries. Every September, the town hosts the Mothman Festival, where believers, skeptics, historians, investigators, and first-time visitors gather to discuss a question that still has no definitive answer. What really happened in Point Pleasant? Was it a misidentified bird? A case of mass suggestion? A combination of coincidence and human psychology? Or did hundreds of ordinary people witness something they still couldn't explain? Perhaps we'll never know. The Silver Bridge collapsed because of a structural failure. That much is supported by evidence. But evidence has never completely erased the questions surrounding the months before the disaster. Why did so many unrelated witnesses describe the same figure? Why did the sightings begin when they did? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, why did they stop almost the moment the bridge fell? Maybe those answers no longer exist, or maybe they were never meant to. Because sometimes the most enduring mysteries aren't the ones with the least evidence. They're the ones where the facts leave just enough room for doubt, enough room for another question, enough room for another generation to wonder whether, on dark autumn nights in 1966, something truly extraordinary stood watching the quiet roads outside Point Pleasant, and whether it came as a monster or as a warning, because every legend has a shadow of truth.